I'll start off first. Does anybody have questions about anything? All right, we're kind of behind, so I may move a little faster than I usually do, just so we can try to get caught up. We're gonna start with chapter 5 today, but then we're all gonna move to chapters 6 and 30, which are the chapters we're supposed to be doing this week. So again, if I'm going too fast, let me know, but I'm gonna try to move a little faster than usual today. Today we're gonna be talking about re-engineering. Does anybody know what that means? Re-engineering? It's not a totally brand new concept. It's something that's been around actually for a while in other industries, and lately it has become more popular in healthcare. Can anyone guess why?
They're changing the way they do things.
Well, that's kind of the definition of re-engineering, but can you give me an idea about why you think that may be occurring more in healthcare now?
Because the things in healthcare are changing. They change every day. So it's like things are added or taken away. So you have to redo how your staff works things and how they do the paperwork and all that kind of stuff. As things change, they add and they subtract.
Okay, that's a good answer.
What about the electronic medical records with the, you know, switching over to everything to, you know, everything's on the computer now?
Okay, that's another good answer. The main reason for re-engineering is mostly financial. The fact that hospitals and healthcare organizations are being challenged to do a lot more with less resources is kind of the driving force behind re-engineering. Every time reimbursements get cut and deducted and shrink down, that doesn't mean that the hospital has to stop what they're doing. They have to continue to provide the services that they're providing, even if their resources are depleting. And so that's kind of been the driving force behind re-engineering. And as I think Brandy said, it's kind of the process of changing things, redoing things that you're already doing in a different way to make you more efficient than you're doing it right now. So here are some of the goals of re-engineering. I just talked about efficiency, so increase productivity, reduce costs. As you are becoming more efficient in re-engineering, you also want to try to reduce your costs. So that may mean, you know, ordering supplies less often or figuring out a way to use your supplies more efficiently so you can save not only the supplies but also costs, improve quality, enhance competitiveness, improve profitability, greater customer service, and you know, you're going to combine some of these together as you go through your re-engineering process. So we talked about what re-engineering is. Now we're going to talk about what it's not. A lot of times when you go to your staff and you say, okay, we're going to be doing some changes, we're going to be re-engineering, people automatically think, oh, somebody's getting fired. So re-engineering is not necessarily downsizing or reorganizing or restructuring. It doesn't directly have anything to do with the staff per se, but more so the actual processes of the things that you're doing or the services that you're providing. So it doesn't mean we're going to cut our staff from 4 to 2. What it may mean is that we're going to take 2 of you and you're going to do this task moving forward, and the other 2 are going to do this task rather than all 4 of you doing the same thing. So to be successful at this, you obviously need to involve leadership. Be us. Here's some of the things you need. You obviously need to participate in the process. You can't just tell your staff to go do this re-engineering, you know, process. You need to be involved. You need to show them that you're engaged in the process and that you support the things that they're doing. Obviously, delegation. You won't be able to do everything on your own. You're not going to be able to change all the processes on your own because you're not doing these tasks every day. So just as you delegate your tasks on a daily basis, you also have to delegate tasks during this process. Employee empowerment. You want to make sure that your staff feels like they have some involvement in the process. and not that they're just being told to go make all these changes and it's not going to affect them. You want to make sure that you communicate to them not only why you're doing the changes, but how it'll affect them and why they need to be involved in it. And the best way to do that is to involve them in it and give them some empowerment so that they can have some autonomy in the way things are going to go. And then last thing is self-directed teams. Does anybody know what a self-directed team is? It's obviously a team, a group of people working together. Self-directed team is a team with minimal oversight. So it obviously has to be a high-performing team if they're capable of working on things on their own. And that's definitely something that you need in the re-engineering process, because you'll have different task force throughout your organization working on different ways to be efficient. And if you have to walk around and micromanage each of those teams, you're not being efficient, right? So, you know, we've talked about re-engineering, what it is, what it's not. One thing that you have to keep in mind is with the staff that you're working with, people tend to become set in their ways, outside of work, in work. So a lot of times the biggest challenge in re-engineering is getting people to change, getting people to realize that things are different now and that they now have to do things differently, and they can't keep stocking the gloves this way in the closet because it's taking up too much space. They have to stock it, you know, this way, or whatever the example may be. It's something that management has to be mindful of. You know, just because we have this great re-engineering plan and we know how it's going to work, doesn't mean it's going to go smoothly. There's going to be always going to be some resistance to change, and that's obviously going to come mostly from the people who have been there and worked there the longest and are so accustomed to doing things a certain way. So how do people get, how do organizations get employees to change and become adaptable to change? A lot of times they bring in consultants. People like me, this is something that I used to have to do, is go into organizations with the plan that they created and take that plan to the staff to help them actually put it into play. So a lot of times organizations will bring in outside consultants, and another reason for that is because, you know, bringing someone in from outside is serves somewhat as a neutral third party. They're not going to have any pre-existing ideas or any biases. A lot of times we would come in and look at the plan and say, actually, this isn't a great plan. You should probably do it this way. And it wasn't, you know, a hit at the organization or anything, but it was just the fact that we came in with fresh eyes and a fresh mind, and we were able to see some things that they still needed to tweak. And so consultants bring that unbiased perspective. Also, again, when someone from the outside comes in, they're totally unfamiliar with anything that an organization does. And so because of that, there's no way for them to influence any staff member or any process anyway. For example, if someone is coming in from the outside and you've historically had two teams or two groups where one team was doing a lot more work than the other team, someone from the outside coming in will easily be able to see that, but they won't have any biases or any relationships with anyone in the team, so it won't appear as though there's any favoritism. Also, politics obviously always plays a role in things. So bringing someone in from the outside, they won't have any political connections. And the last thing is when consultants come in, they usually come in under a proposal. They have a set amount of time to accomplish these things. So they're constantly moving. They're trying to push the project forward. There's a lot less likelihood for the project to lag or get paused or get delayed or get canceled completely, because these people have been paid to come in to do a job, so it's going to get done. Classic error. A lot of times an organization will, you know, have this great plan to re-engineer, and it may only be for one department. And so they go and they fix this department and they think everything's good, but it's not. So let's take, for example, I'm picking on you because you're in the front row. You're the imaging department, right? Radiology, MRI, CAT scan, and we come in, we completely re-engineer your department, and you guys are so much more efficient now. But think about how many departments rely on you for different things.
Right.
Everybody, right? In the hospital, you know, regardless of if it's cardiology or orthopedics, they all send patients to you. So if we're not involving everybody in the organization in your re-engineering process, is it really going to fix things in the grand scheme of things?
No.
And even if, you know, again, even if we're focusing on this one department and re-engineering, everybody should at least, at the minimum, be communicated to about what's going on there.
Right.
Even if we're not focusing on fixing anything else in any other department, there still has to be some level of involvement with the department that is being re-engineered so that everybody's on the same page. And a lot of times that does not happen. And so it's an error that a lot of organizations make. Challenges. A major challenge is dealing with employees. And you know, as we talked about earlier, a lot of times people get afraid and they think that there's going to be job cuts. And it does happen sometimes, you know, if you figure out that a more efficient way to do something and you may not find a need for, you know, a certain employee. I don't want you guys to think that it never happens, because it does happen sometimes, but it doesn't happen all the time. And a lot of times when people come in to work on projects that are related to re-engineering, that's always the first thing that comes to people's minds. So there's this huge fear among the employees, and it spreads very fast, that there's going to be downsizing and job loss, and of course that dominoes into loss of employee morale and job satisfaction. So I made this a separate slide because it's important that before you even start anything in your re-engineering process is that you have to kind of damage control. You have to communicate to everybody what's going on, what's not going to happen, so that there's a, you know, a sense of relief and that people aren't walking around on pins and needles.
Word of mouth is a killer.
Yeah.
Well, it can spread like wildfire.
Yeah. As I started this lecture out, we talked about organizations having to do more with less, and it's becoming a reality, a regular reality now in hospitals and healthcare organizations. And because of that, you're finding that a lot of hospitals and organizations are starting to merge. I've read even in this area about, I think in Harnett County, there's healthcare organizations out there that have joined together or merged together because they just can't survive on their own financially. And as a result of merging, a lot of times that's what fuels re-engineering. You know, you have two separate entities coming together, you have two of everything. You don't need two of everything. So how can you re-engineer your organization to become more efficient, to keep those two people, or to keep those two of everything, but to figure out how you can work more effectively together. So management and supervisors during this process are key, because a lot of times, again, there may be this fear that somebody's going to lose their job. Like I just said, there's two supervisors. What's the use for two supervisors? Is somebody going to get cut? And a lot of times what happens is they get more responsibilities. So if you're managing a small department, that small department you are managing might grow to be a larger department. And then since there's two supervisors, you may have one supervisor doing one aspect in that large team, and then have the other supervisor managing something else in that large team. So your duties will more than likely change as supervisor if you have to go through a merger in your organization. While your duties may change, obviously who you report to might also change. So you might go from reporting to a boss that you've had a great relationship with to reporting to someone that you don't even know. And I saw this a lot too, and again, that goes back to having a lot of communication going on and setting up some meetings so that you can get to know that person if you're going to be working with them regularly, so that you can start to build that relationship. So, you're probably thinking, this sounds kind of heavy, like, how am I going to survive all of this? Here's some things that it's going to require. More time management, more planning and organizing, more attention to prioritizing, really thinking about what task is most important for me today, and then from there, what am I going to do next? And more people to oversee. What that means is, while you may have done a great job at creating interpersonal relationships with your group, you got to take it to the next level now because you're overseeing more people. So you got to get out there even more and do more rounding and more visits and more meetings and more communicating with your staff just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, especially since, again, you're working with 2 different organizations coming together. So it's going to be increasingly important to make sure that everybody's on the same page that you oversee. Here's some key tasks. Obviously, deadlines and follow-up are going to be even more key because, again, especially if you are reporting to different people, you got to start all the way over again, building that relationship and showing them that you're capable of doing the job. So you're basically starting all over and having to impress someone new. Follow-up. When the deadline comes and you haven't finished, it's important to follow up with the person that you're reporting to, I think before the deadline, and let them know, look, I'm running into some roadblocks, I'm not finished, what's the next step? Or can you give me more time? Or can I bring in someone to help me? But just kind of asking questions to figure out how you can meet that deadline. And so now we're gonna transition into the next one. Does anybody have any questions about re-engineering? As I said, re-engineering was something that I actually had a lot of involvement with. And sometimes it was successful, sometimes it wasn't. It's not always a successful task. Oftentimes, it's a pretty big plate that you have to take over, especially when the organization is really big. That makes it a little bit more difficult. Chapter 6 is dealing with job descriptions, which you all will have to do if you take management roles. Does anybody have any experience with developing job descriptions? Writing them up? I'm sure you've all seen them when you apply for jobs, hopefully. Basically what a job description does is it tells you about the job, tells you what your duties are going to be, what your tasks are going to be. Hopefully it tells you who you are going to be reporting to. Doesn't always, I don't always see that, but I think it's something important that should be in the job descriptions. Typically you'll see positions that are salaried or hourly. Hopefully everybody knows what that means. Typically salaried positions are exempt and hourly are non-exempt. Does anybody know what the difference between exempt and non-exempt? What is it? Anybody want to guess?
Doesn't it apply to like hours worked and overtime? And
Exactly.
If you're hourly, you're entitled to that. If you're salaried, you're not.
Right. Right. So if you're exempt, you can work 40 hours a week. You can work 60 hours a week. You pay the same. If you're hourly, obviously if you work 40 hours and you work 60, that's a pretty substantial difference. Especially because most organizations will pay you time and a half for overtime. Most job descriptions will also list competencies. And competencies speak to skills or skills that are needed for the job. So that might include you need to have a bachelor's degree, or it may include you need to have 4 years of experience, or specific license. Those are all different types of competencies that might be listed on the job description. Reporting relationships, I just talked about this. This explains who you'll be reporting to. Sometimes it'll list the title or who you are directly accountable to. And here are some other things that the job description should have. Authority of position, degree of independence, responsibilities and duties. Special demands and working conditions. So obviously job descriptions have different uses. We all see them online. That was a given. But what about training? Why might it be important in training?
So they can know exactly what they're being trained on?
Right. I think that as you go through training, you should have the job description right there alongside with you, so that as you're doing the task, you see exactly where it is on your job description and why it's relevant and why you're learning how to do it. Applications related to performance evaluation. How many of you have seen your job description come back out when you did your annual evaluation? Or right. And that's important as well, so that if for whatever reason there's something that you haven't been doing or an employee hasn't been doing, you can refer back to that job description and see it, say it's listed here that you are supposed to do this once a week, but you haven't been doing it, and that's why I docked you this on your evaluation. So it can kind of be like support as for, you know, the reasons why you gave them the evaluation that you did. Here are some other not as common uses for job descriptions. Counseling, advertising, raises. If you have a job description and you can refer to that and you can see that the employee is totally going above and beyond that, justification for a raise. Records and for legal purposes. If something were to happen, let's say, you know, some type of harassment happened, and you pulled out the job description and it said that this person was supposed to be working in this warehouse and the harassment happened somewhere else, again, that's support for saying that they probably were somewhere that they weren't supposed to be. Performance standards. We're moving away from job description, going on to performance standards. And these standards typically tell the employee what they're supposed to do, how well they're supposed to do it, and how often. So can anybody think of an example of a performance standard? I'll give you an example. I used to have to work with physicians that would have to be on call at a hospital, and one of their performance standards was that they had to return a call in 30 minutes or less. If they didn't do that, then they were outside of that performance standard. For some types of doctors, it's 15 minutes. Kind of just depends on your specialty. The ones that are more acute, like cardiology, 15 minutes. Or, you have to report to the hospital in 30 minutes. Those are the types of things that are performance standards. So kind of like, somewhat like a goal, but more like an expectation a little bit. Now these are important because without any standards, then it leaves a lot of ambiguity. Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to be to the hospital in 30 minutes. Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to prescribe this, or give this medicine every 4 hours to the patient. So it leaves a lot of gray area, and if there's gray area, you have nothing to stand on when it comes down to having to discipline employees. Again, if you don't have documentation or proof of anything that you had any type of standards, when you go to try to reprimand them, what do you have to stand on? Nothing. So it's very important that you make sure that you have your performance standards in place. Most organizations will have 3 levels. Obviously, number 1 does not meet expectations, meets expectations, and exceeds expectations. I'm sure you guys have seen that before, hopefully. Here are some examples of an appropriate standard. Describes a level below which performance is not acceptable, provides a challenge but is attainable by most incumbents, is results-based and quantifiable whenever possible, or is specific, objective, and measurable. I like the last one. Specific, everybody knows what's going on. Objective, it's not biased in any way, and it's measurable. It's something you can measure, you can come back to it. They always say, like, numbers tell stories. So if it's something you can measure, it's something you can, clearly show to your staff or your employee, XYZ was not done, or XYZ was done, or you went above this or below it. Here are a few more. It needs to be something that doesn't discriminate. Very important. Any member of a group protected. It also should be something that directly or indirectly benefits customers, which are our patients. If you're setting standards that have totally nothing to do with the service you're providing or your organization or your customer, it's kind of a waste. You want to limit the use of always or never. Anybody tell me why?
It's kind of like it's making a promise, or you're saying definitely no or definitely yes.
Yeah.
Instead of saying maybe or we'll look into it or something like that.
Exactly. It deals with the performance that the employee control. You don't want to provide a standard that's totally, not feasible or something that they can do. Kind of similar to goal. You want to make sure that it's a standard that is something they can control. Arriving to the hospital within 30 minutes is something they can control. They have transportation or means of finding transportation, so that's something they can control. So, that would be an appropriate standard. And that links into staff development. There's a few different types of staff development. You have career development. Anybody give me an example of that? Or?
Is that where they basically change their training them for a different part in the organization? Kind of like they're helping them move up. They're training them to expand their career.
Yep. All right. And then you have educational planning, which will deal with training, or it might deal with encouraging your employees to go back to school, or like tuition reimbursement or something like that. And then you have self-development, and that deals more so with the actual individual. And as we all know, each individual has to have that internal motivation to want to progress and do more. So we think in terms of an educational needs assessment as managers or supervisors. These are some of the questions we would ask. If we're thinking in terms of our department, we will need to know what expertise is needed in our department. So if we're thinking in terms of a cardiology department, obviously we would need to have staff and nurses with expertise in the field of cardiology. Then you want to think on the individual basis. So what's needed by each employee? You're obviously going to have staff that's been there a lot longer than some other staff, so they may need to be brought up to date. So what do you need to do to bring those staff up to date? And that links into, again, for people who've been there for a while, what can you do to energize them, to get them back motivated and engaged and not kind of just coming in every day and seeming mundane about the things that they're doing. And then how does the knowledge of employees compare with the skills needed in their field? Do you have employees that are kind of below the curve and not up on the newest trends in cardiology? Or if you were to compare your staff with another staff in another hospital, how do they measure up? How do their skills measure up? Do you have the top nurses at your hospital, or are they kind of just average? So those are all things that you would ask yourself to know if educational planning is needed, or if there needs to be an improvement in your educational planning. Now, if we need to determine our training needs, these are some of the things that we have to do. First, we probably need to consult the HR department to see if there's any performance deficiencies in evaluations. That will obviously, hopefully on the evaluation they have asked, do you have all the supplies and all the training that you need to do your job? Some people will answer yes, some people will answer no. The no's are the ones that we will focus in on to see what it is they need to do their job better. You obviously want to look at the behavior of your employees and how they interact with the patients and the other staff. Maybe the customer service is not there. So maybe that's a red flag that there needs to be customer service training, which will link into looking at surveys to see what the surveys are saying from the patients. That's definitely a great way to see where there may be a deficiency somewhere and what you need to have training in. You mentioned that healthcare is always changing. So there's always going to be justification for training to make sure that everybody's kept up to date with the changing laws and policies that are always going on in healthcare. And then last, you want to review the organization's mission statement to make sure that your department, your staff are in line with what the organization as a whole wants to do. So that will require looking at the mission, the values, and the vision, because as we talked about before, the vision statement is more forward-looking and futuristic. So you want to make sure that the things that you're doing in your department are in line with what the organization wants to do. So how do we develop these staff? You know, what are our options? Well, we just talked about training. You can do in-service educations. I don't know if you guys have heard of lunch and learns, where a lot of times organizations will provide lunch to the staff, but during the lunch they'll have someone come in, a speaker, or they'll watch a webinar on TV or on the internet or something like that. Workshops or seminars. Depending on the budget, you may be able to send certain staff out to different workshops and they can come back and report to the department as a whole what happened. Job rotation and cross-training. I think that is a great idea. If you are able to send some of your staff to another department just for a day or two to see how they do the things they do, I think it gives the employees a better idea as to how everybody links together. In the big picture. So, you know, if I send, you know, Leslie to radiology and she works in cardiology and she just sits there, even if you just sit there for a couple hours to see what they do and how they work, I think it'll give you a broader idea of how everybody needs to work together to get things done. And then obviously books, journals. I've seen some departments have little libraries where they keep magazines and books, and employees can go in and look at the books during their lunch, or if they get to work early or something like that. Those are all good ideas. Here are a few more. Special assignments. I've seen managers give special assignments sometimes for the purpose of training employees or trying to teach them something new outside of the daily tasks that they already do. Committees and work groups are also good ideas. Promotions. Promotions are always a good push to develop, right? You know, if you get this education, or if you get this training, I'll look into seeing if I can give you a promotion. And substituting for absent employees, which I think is also a good idea. If someone's out for the day, have somebody else step in. They're not going to know everything that they do, but I think it's a great way to train them in how to do something new that they're not already doing. And then if that person's out again, you know, you have somebody that you can just fill into their space easily. So career building. How do we build these staff in their career and get them going, moving them up? Well, we work on the easier skills first to make sure that we set them up for success. So an easy skill might be encouraging them to go to a workshop. You know, a harder skill might be encouraging them to go back to school. So you want to kind of work on the easier things first. And that, I think, also kind of builds their confidence as well, if they're accomplishing small goals, moving up to larger ones. Maintain a high ratio of praise to criticism. We all know this. If you're constantly criticizing somebody, they're not going to build anything, let alone build their career. You have to be patient. A lot of times, we all hit plateaus. Very rarely do you see people continue to climb like this. Most people will climb a little bit and hit a plateau, and then they'll climb a little bit more and they'll hit a plateau. So you have to expect them to come and be mentally prepared for them so that you don't get discouraged and you continue to be motivated. And then last thing is, you know, along with managing and overseeing people, you always have to continue to be that coach, that mentor, because there's always going to be people looking up to you, even if you don't know it. So you want to make sure that you're constantly encouraging people and being that person that they can look up to, so that they have a role model or somebody that they can say, well, you know, my manager, you know, has been here for 2 years and she already moved up, so if she can do it or he can do it, I can do it too. So we're going to talk a little bit more about counseling because I think it's really important. Because you're growing, you're grooming people. So you have to be there to help them make those decisions. You know, should I go for this license or this license? Or should I go back to school for this program or this program? These are questions that you're going to be asked. You may not always have the right answer, but you can at least sit there and discuss the options with them and talk it out so they have somebody to bounce ideas off of. There's been plenty of times where I had questions or issues and I went to my mentors and they didn't have an answer, but it just felt good having somebody to go to talk to bounce my ideas off. And sometimes they would say your idea is totally trash. And that's good too, to be able to have somebody that can just be honest with you and upfront. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing that you can be as a counselor or a mentor is somebody that they know that they have in their corner, regardless of the decision that they make. It's just good to know that you have somebody that's interested in you and your growth and your progression. So, you think being a manager, coach, mentor requires you to be creative? I think so.
To other people.
Yeah.
And be able to understand and be able to get to their level, depending on where that's at.
Right. You don't have to be very creative, even when it comes down to assigning tasks, working with different types of people. You have to be creative to know how to reach out to everybody. You're going to have to switch up some things to be able to interact with certain employees, and you may have to be creative in how you relay that same information to a different type of employee. So here are a few characteristics of creative people. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's a lot. They dislike rigid routines. That's pretty obvious. They like change. Always curious, asking questions. They don't like ambiguity. They like being in charge. They like being independent. They enjoy innovative processes. They love to read. Would you agree? I think most creative people like to read. They like to learn. They're nonconformists, and they like playing the role of devil's advocate. You're laughing. Are you creative? So you play devil's advocate a lot? A lot, yeah. So, what's a creative supervisor? Somebody who always thinks there's a better way to do something. You're always looking to improve, always looking to change. They view problems as challenges. What a concept. It's not a problem, it's a challenge. Something we can fix. Yeah. They use brainstorming techniques. They cut red tape when they encounter it. Agree, disagree?
I agree.
And you will see red tape.
Can't go here.
They inject humor. Agree? Creative people have humor. You have to be able to, sometimes you have to make, if it's a situation or a challenge, not a problem, sometimes you need that humor to kind of just get through it.
Because that's what they say, it changes the situation. If you can make it into, take a bad situation and you could throw that one piece of humor in there, it could break that whole thing apart. And so it could change the whole way the thing is going, situation.
Yep. All right, so let's say you're the manager, you're the supervisor, you're so creative. How do you transfer that energy over to your staff? Hopefully, you'll have a couple in your group. So they say the first step is to identify them. Identify who your innovative people are. Use orientation and training as a great opportunity to emphasize creativity. Give them the opportunity to be creative, starting in the beginning, and training and orientation. Some of this, I think, you have to be able to empower your employees and give them space to be creative. If you haven't given them any empowerment or any autonomy to do anything, and you're micromanaging, you're always over their shoulder, what motivation do they have to be creative? So give them some space to be creative. And that goes along with letting them take some risk and make a few mistakes. Being creative is somewhat of a risk because you will make mistakes sometimes. You may not always make the best decision because you've been creative about it. If that's the case, and if you as a supervisor has encouraged creativity, you can't, come back and heavily reprimand them for taking that risk of trying to be creative. So creativity sounds great, but obviously there has to be some risk to it, some barriers. We just talked about one. Fear of failure. True or false?
It depends on how you look at the situation. Some people become fearful when it gets closer and closer to the deadline, or they don't exactly know how it's going to play out, so that fear kind of sets in. But if you're sure about yourself and what you're doing, then you shouldn't have that fear.
Well, think about it like this. We just talked about how being creative sometimes is a risk, and mistakes might happen. So let's say you were creative and you made took that risk and you made that mistake and you failed.
Take it as
that might make you a little bit more fearful the next time, right? Of failing again or being creative again. And so that's one barrier to creativity. Sometimes being creative costs money. Sometimes you go to your boss and say, I have this great idea, I want to do X, Y, Z, and it's creative and it's innovative, and they may say no because it may be expensive. So sometimes, lack of money might be a barrier to creativity. What about understaffing and excessive assignments? Another barrier. So to stimulate creativity among your staff, these are some things or some ways that you can kind of get that movement going. And some of them include seminars and meetings, bringing in guest speakers, customer input. I've seen this happen a lot of times. Sometimes patients have great ideas on how to improve things. So if we were to take this input from the patients, take it into consideration, that might be another way that we can kind of expose our staff to more creativity. So regardless of the idea, whether it's creative or just a regular idea, as managers, you should always keep this in mind. They call it the PIC response. The P stands for positive, the I stands for interesting, and the C stands for concern. So somebody give me an idea. Any idea? Just an example. Any random idea.
Doesn't matter if it's good or
No.
bad. Now when you go to the hospital, you have to show your ID, things of that nature.
Okay, so showing your ID. So let's say you came up with that idea. Let's enforce patients having to show their ID. So I might say, all right, that sounds like a good idea. Now I might also say, let's look into it more. Let's see how many other hospitals are, doing the same idea or requiring the same thing. And then I might follow that up with saying, well, I think it's a really great idea. We should look into it more. But how might that affect our patients? And that might be my way of expressing my concern to your idea. It's not necessarily in a negative way towards you, but it's also showing you that I might have a little bit of reservation about your idea, and that we definitely need to think about how that might affect our customers or our patients. So that's an example of a PIC response to somebody's idea. And I think I have covered everything I wanted to cover today in a whirlwind. So if you have any questions, let me know. But I think we are finally caught up. So I'm proud of myself. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, let me know. If not, then we're done for today. I'll see you guys on Thursday.
Oh, you should have just went ahead and did that last